Okay, we're back with another episode of Kherson Weekly. This one's going to be a little bit longer than usual because we got more to cover. I took some time off from the videos in the past couple weeks um, in order to, well, first off, it was the holiday um, in the US. It was Thanksgiving, and I needed time to catch up. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, recording this late here on Wednesday night. So, first off and foremost, we're going to go through um, 24th, 30th November Kherson Weekly, and we're going to go through 1st to 7th December Kherson Weekly. And I'll just briefly talk about Red Zone Ukraine at the very end um, for our episode this week. So, from the week before, we had 84 total casualties from Russian aggression. 11 people were killed and 73 wounded. Of those, 9 were killed and 26 were wounded by Russian human safari drone attacks. And here we could see the ruins of buildings near the riverbank in Stanislav, taken by Mirukar, Jakuva. Um, this campaign, well, I mean, I guess you could donate, but it's technically closed. But we have a new one, so on the most recent article, you can go to that, and there's a new Kherson Help drone fundraiser that's ongoing. So please donate to that. They need to update the chips or the software inside the drone detectors in order to account for changes in Russian drones. So we need to make sure that that happens so that volunteers and medical personnel can actually get in and out of the city. So if you want to actually help people on the ground, this is a really easy, simple way to do it. This week only really had a situation report. I didn't do drone data last week. Um, it's been there's a lot of stuff going on in the background that I can't talk about yet, but um, we'll just go through the situation report of each week because I didn't really dive into Russian footage the last 2 weeks. In Kherson Raion, 4 civilians wounded earlier this month by Russian shelling sought medical attention this week. A 64-year-old woman from Belozerka wounded on 16th November, a 78-year-old woman from Dniprovsky Raion wounded on 20th November, a 77-year-old man from Belozerka wounded on the 21st of November, and a 64-year-old woman from Dniprovsky Raion wounded on the 22nd of November. Additionally, a man of an unknown age reportedly received medical attention on 27th November after being wounded in Kherson by artillery shelling at an unknown prior date. 2 more victims of an unknown age and sex reportedly received medical attention on 28th November after being injured by Russian shelling at an unknown date. On 24th November, Russian shelling killed a 61-year-old woman and wounded a 39-year-old woman in Dniprovsky Raion. The 61-year-old woman was identified by Governor Alexander Prokudin as Kherson National Technical University professor Marina Hubai. Вечный память. Governor Prokudin wrote, early in Kherson, Russian terrorists killed as in that day, early in Kherson, Russian terrorists killed Marina Hubai, a lecturer in the Department of State Management and Local Self-Government of the Kherson National Technical University. For the educational community of Kherson, this is a great loss. Colleagues remember Marina Igorevna as an intellectual, responsible, warm, and very sincere person. She raised generations of professionals who are still working on the development and restoration of our region today. My sincere condolences to her family, friends, and colleagues at KHNTU. Eternal and bright memory. Russian shelling continued on 24th November with a 50-year-old man and a 58-year-old woman reporting injuries from Russian shelling in Belozerka as well. In Karabalny Raion, a 58-year-old man stepped on a Russian anti-personnel mine. And here we have some of the aftermath of the shelling. Let me mute my microphone, and then we'll go back to it.
Ну так, 9-17 і так.
І оце будинок пошкодив.
Будинок, де жінку вбило.
А жінка де була?
Жінку забрали.
В будинку була?
Ні, на вулиці воно. Вон я ветками прикрив калюжу крові.
Вообще 3 прилета, третьих денег я не знаю. Ну, то, что это очень где-то близко и
Да,
рядом.
вони рядом як-то.
Где-то третій було тут.
Ну що, ну ви ж бачили перед хатою, що робиться.
Я сидела в кресле в углу, напротив окон. Мне не слышала выхода, не слышала ничего. На голову посыпалось, меня засыпало раствором. Ну, потихоньку с костылями вышла.
Це у вас, оте, да, поранило вас?
Я не смотрела. Я увидела что-то тут розовое между пальцев. Я еще ничего не смотрела.
Ну, все повилітало.
Нашу крышу сломала с Одинцовской стороны.
Okay. Yeah, so we see there were a series of strikes there. A really elderly woman was injured, although she was not listed among the victims that day. I don't think, excuse me, I don't think she technically sought medical attention, so I don't think she was counted as injured. But as you could see, she was clearly slightly wounded by the shelling and the glass, especially, flying everywhere and debris flying everywhere. Okay. Also on the 24th of November, Russian drone attacks killed a 60-year-old man in Belozerka and wounded 5 police officers in Dniprovsky Rayon. One of the officers, 36-year-old police captain Konstantin Zaderi, passed away from the severity of his injuries on 27th November. Вечным память. And also on 25th November, Russian shelling wounded 3 civilians, a 46-year-old man and a 55-year-old woman from Dniprovsky Rayon, and an 11-year-old boy from Belozerka. Let's take a look at the consequences of Russian shelling on a children's hospital. Oh wait, no, this isn't a children's hospital. This is a
Скільки це було?
kindergarten.
Як кажуть сусіди, 7.
Постраждалих нема.
Немає постраждалих. Просто жах. Це ужас. Ой.
Now, I have to say, it's not often that you can hear more shelling going on in the background of these videos that they release. I watch every single one that comes out, and it's not very often that you hear that much shelling going on in the background while they're walking through the aftermath of stuff. Yeah, so that was a kindergarten. Yeah, detachny sadka, tak. Okay. Detachny sadok. Nazivnemu Vidmenki. Okay. On the 26th of November, Russian drone attacks killed 3 civilians and wounded an additional 6. Among the dead was a 52-year-old man from the tiny village of Honcharne, west of Kherson. And according to Kherson on fake, Russian drones attacked a taxi in Karabalny Rayon that evening, killing a 34-year-old mother who was a medical worker, Alina Akinina. And her 6-year-old son, Vladislav. A 50-year-old man who was driving the taxi was seriously wounded as well. And you can see here, these are their bodies. And this is who they were. And this is what Russia does. More drone strikes in Karabalny Rayon wounded a 16-year-old girl, a 22-year-old woman, and a 63-year-old man. A 75-year-old woman was injured by a Russian drone attack in Chernobyevka too. So we see, right, like, we're 2 days into this week, and we already had a handful of children wounded by drone attacks and shelling. Way more than usual. Far more than usual. Made this week particularly rough. Okay, наслідки російського обстрілу Дніпровського району. Okay, so this is shelling in Dniprovsky Rayon on the 26th. Let's take a look.
Десять 0,5 десь так. 10,05
Скільки було вибухів?
Тут був один у нас вибух і де-то ще один там був і один там був в той стороні. Це 3 вибуха було. І ще були десь вибухи, ми вже на це не обращав, тому що перший прильот це у нас був.
Пошкодження які у вас?
Ось все, що 2 машини, в тому дворі, тут, оце все тут. Ми справді сюди переїхали, тут жили, там те ж саме. Там ракети сняло, тут снарядом.
Там у вас теж будинок
Був будинок, вже нема будинка. Його нема, він 3 прильоти в одну хату. Все, її немає. В поліцію позвонили, дані дали по поводу машин. Тут зараз люди допомагають. Тут винесло це все. Тут так же само. Винесло, розбило, стіни полопали. Буду помало клепати, як кажуть, і робити помало буду. Жінка тут була, її тут привалило трохи. Ну, вона після того і першого вибуха контузія, дуже велика ранення і контузія. Ну, а це вже пронесло, чисто вже пронесло, що вона в це время тут знаходилось і все. Це все побило у нас так.
Нет, оно не трясло, а летело. Вот все на нас, как будто вот думаешь, что сейчас придать.
Damn, you can really tell the artillery shelling is getting worse with an explosion that loud in the video again, and that was the next day. So what she and the man were saying is essentially it was a barrage of rocket fire, and there were 3 in the area of the man and his wife's house, and the old woman at the end, she was one of their neighbors. There was one rocket that landed pretty much like almost right on their house. And you could see the damage that came in through the window and like took out the ceiling and stuff like that. All the shrapnel that chipped out all the pieces of the ceiling and ripped the roof and siding off the house essentially, and put a hole through the wall. With Grad 122 rockets, most likely. That's when we see rocket artillery in Kherson, that's essentially what it is. The Russians do have Uragan, and I mean, they do have North Korean systems too, so they have that, but I know for a fact that they have Uragan and Smerch. We saw a Smerch get knocked out a couple months back. And then we've seen Uragans maybe a couple times taken out over the course of the last year in the Kherson axis. Maybe only one time. But BM-21 Grads are primarily what these units are using to carry out the shelling. That's just what they're equipped with most of the time. The heavier artillery is being used elsewhere. And then really the majority of the shelling that happens in the city is barrel artillery. And we're not talking about tracked SPGs here. We're talking about mostly like we know of an SPG unit that is no longer an SPG unit. They're using towed guns. So it's mostly entrenched towed guns in positions that are firing on Kherson, and tanks being used as indirect fire. We're seeing that quite a lot. So you'll see T-62s, because a lot of these units lost their good shit in Krinky. So you'll see like they're using absolute fucking trash. So you'll see like T-62s being used as indirect fire platforms, as SPGs essentially, but they're not SPGs. They're a piece of shit tank from 60 years ago. So yeah, that's what we got. So all right, continuing on. 11 civilians were wounded by Russian shelling and 9 in Chornobayivka. Chornobayivka again getting hit by rocket artillery. 3 men, 41, 70, 78, and 6 women, 41, 60, 65, 68, 72, and 76, all sustained injuries from barrages of Russian multiple rocket launcher shelling directed on the settlement located northwest of Kherson. 2 more civilians sustained injuries from shelling. A 31-year-old woman from Tavrisky Rayon inside Kherson city, and a 61-year-old man from Bilazerka. On 27th November, Russian drone attacks wounded 6 civilians, with 1 dying from their injuries in hospital later in the week. West of Kherson, 2 civilians were wounded, a 69-year-old woman from Komishany and a 72-year-old man driving a car from Priozerne. The man from Priozerne died from his injuries on 29th November after medical workers fought for his life for 2 days. In Dniprovsky Rayon, a 70-year-old man was attacked by drones and wounded near a store, while a 58-year-old woman and a 59-year-old man also suffered injuries from Russian drone attacks. Another 58-year-old man was injured in Korabany Rayon. Let's take a look at the shelling from the 27th here. This is in Chornobayivka. So, наслідки російського обстрілу Чорнобаївки.
Так само до тебе. Гуманітарка і все. Перший раз нічого, а другий раз ми вспіли тільки в коридор. Заскочили, то йому воно рубануло голову, зашили вчора. І все. І все. Куча дима. Пиляки і більше нічого. Оце як почули, воно почало все трясти. Оце отуто в нас спасло. Оце двері тільки єдине, що в туалеті Бачите, що?
І вікна.
Як його тепер робити, це все. І до зими йде.
Ну ось ж ба ось воно балкон винесло з тої сторони, двері винесло, он заходьте в під'їзд.
Тут був один вибух сильний. Було там десь далі, потім іще десь далі, потім ближче, а потім уже як тут ухнуло, то наш дом здригнувся.
Вибух був в 17:25, ну плюс-мінус там минути. І 4 було вибухи. Я прибігла до сестри, а тут пошкодження криша, вікна, потолок там впав.
Десь 5 сразу. І оце останнє отут. І через вікно я бачила огонь. І земля тряслася. Все. І тишина. Оце останній був.
Церква, хата. Вікно ось вибите, там двері переклинило. В основному ось удар. В хаті я була. Ну, за ось сиділа ось за цією стіною. Тут. Мені вчора було нічого, але сьогодні погано мені чуть душа гудить.
Okay, so yeah, what you could gather from that is the church was attacked. Her home was damaged, but her walls, the elderly woman at the very end, her walls were strong. I mean, she has a brick house. But that apartment building, some of the residents described upwards of 25 explosions, or up to 25 explosions. And then the couple who were talking about the experience inside the building, they had mentioned that there were rounds of barrage, of bombardment. Even though 25, there's enough rocket pods on a BM-21 Grad to do 25 rockets all in one go. They said that there were 2 rounds. The first round, they weren't able to seek cover, but by the second, excuse me for the yawn. By the second round, they had made it to the corridor to seek shelter. All right, Russian shelling on the 27th also wounded 4 more civilians inside Kherson Rayon. An 18-year-old boy, a 65-year-old woman, and a 89-year-old woman from Dniprovsky Rayon were all wounded. West of Kherson, a 38-year-old man from Bilazerka was wounded by shelling. On 28th November, a Russian drone hit a civilian car, seriously wounding a 50-year-old man and a 43-year-old woman. The man succumbed to his injuries almost immediately, while the woman was transported to the hospital in critical condition with severe injuries. A 63-year-old woman was also wounded by artillery shelling in the Dniprovsky Rayon. We got video of that from Andrei Boxer Petukhov. This is a tough one. This is a tough one. The drone attack produced injuries incompatible with life for both of them, essentially. It's a miracle that the 43-year-old woman even survived. Severe amputation of legs due to shrapnel entering the chassis of the car, because the drone hit the front of the car. And when that happens, sometimes people's legs can get mangled by the shrapnel, depending on how exactly the engine block like explodes or not. Or if the drone hits above the engine and closer to the dashboard and then enters that way, you can get some really nasty injuries. I think that is what happened here. Because also all of the glass was blown in, and the glass and the shrapnel essentially removed this woman's face. Is really the only way that you can put it. Yeah. One of the worst things. Be advised.
Давай, давай. Вон лежит. Двое, да. 200. Нет, Миша! 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 Нет, Миша не живой. О, боже мой, не, жінка не жива. Не, жива, ви жива? Да, жива. Дима, сюда. И дышит. Он живой. Он живой. Миша, терпи, давай. Грузим. Терпи. Давай, давай. Ой, боже мой, потерпіть. Терпіть. Терпіть, будь ласка. Я достаю, терпіть. Давай, дав. Ти за ноги. За ноги. Давай. Давай. Держитесь. Держитесь, пожалуйста. Держитесь, пожалуйста. Пожалуйста, держитесь, я с вами, я разговариваю. Держитесь. Вы будете жить, все будет хорошо. Вы будете жить. 300. Тачки давайте, они, блядь, тяжелые очень. Держитесь. Давайте еще одну. Давайте еще каталку, где? Тримайся.
Oh, what the fuck? Pretty bad. The next day, 3 civilians were attacked and wounded by Russian drone attacks in Dnipropetrovsk Raion on 29th November. A 43-year-old father and his 13-year-old son, another child this week, were injured by a drone attack while driving in their car. 8 more civilians were wounded that day by miscellaneous Russian shelling. A 55-year-old woman and a 76-year-old man were wounded in Dnipropetrovsk Raion. A 55-year-old male municipal worker, a 65-year-old man, and a 52-year-old woman were wounded in Kherson Raion, but the 54-year-old man, identified as Kherson Community Service employee, Kherson Community Service employee Alexander Hryhorovich Hudima, later died from his injuries. We have comment from Kherson MVA. This is Alexander. It's with great sadness that we announce the death of Alexander Hryhorovich Hudima. He was seriously injured as a result of Russian shelling on 29th November. Medics fought for his life until the last moment, but the man could not be saved. Alexander Hryhorovich was a driver for the Kherson Community Service company A man of great courage and responsibility, he always worked on dangerous routes despite constant shelling. He helped Kherson's residents. He took an active part in evacuation measures in the most difficult moments. His activities were not just work, it was a service to the community, Kherson, and every person he helped. We express our sincere condolences to the family, friends, and colleagues of Mr. Alexander. May the memory of the deceased be bright. Vichna Pamya. West of Kherson, an 82-year-old woman and a 60-year-old man were wounded by Russian shelling in the village of Bilazerka. Additionally, a 37-year-old municipal worker was injured by shelling while administering repairs to a critical infrastructure facility in Kherson. So, with the increased attacks on Ukraine's power grid, we're also seeing that in Kherson, and that's going to continue the week after this when we talk about the most recent Kherson Weekly. On 30th November, Russian attacks focused on the city and its microdistricts. 5 civilians were wounded by Russian shelling in Dniprovsky Raion. 4 men, 38, 53, 58, and 73, and an 84-year-old woman. 3 civilians were wounded by Russian drone attacks across the city. A 40-year-old man in Centralny Raion, a 62-year-old man in Pivnichny Raion, and a 68-year-old woman in Karabalny Raion. In Beryaslavsky Raion, drone attacks killed 2 civilians and wounded 3 more. In Beryaslav City, a 65-year-old man was killed and a 77-year-old woman was injured on 28th November. In Novovorontssovka, a 62-year-old woman was killed and a 61-year-old woman was injured on 24th November, while a Russian drone attack on 26th November wounded another 62-year-old woman in Novovorontssovka. Shelling in Zolotobalka on 25th November wounded a 42-year-old woman. In the northwest of Kherson Oblast, a 17-year-old boy stepped on a landmine, suffering the amputation of his leg. He was rescued from the woods in which he was walking by a juvenile police officer, a member of the armed services, and a local resident. The woods were mined back in 2022 when the Inhulets River was a frontline combat zone during the invasion and Kherson counteroffensive. On 2nd December, Kherson City and Military Administration head Yaroslav Shanko released a summary of November showcasing the daily destruction and terror wrought upon the city by Russian forces. He stated 17 people were killed and another 145 people were wounded. Within the Khersonska urban Hromada over the course of the month, I have recorded 17 killed as well, but 146 wounded in the Khersonska urban Hromada, including police officers and some casualties seeking medical treatment and reportedly wounded at an earlier unspecified date. So we're pretty much neck and neck. I think I had the advantage of an extra day to produce this, and that's why I was able to find out about an extra casualty, because someone who was wounded earlier in the month came forward after he put this video out already. So we're making sure that the tracking, like my numbers and the officials' numbers, let me see if I can put it in front of my face here. We're keeping them tight. We're keeping the stats tight. I pride myself on really making sure that my statistics are accurate. There needs to be accurate, extremely precise data about this. There needs to be. And that's why I do this. Okay. Let's watch the video, the summary of November. It's a visual summary, more or less.
второго этажа не было, я не знаю, мне тут вообще не знаю, так страшно. Бахнуло сильно, тому що тут стріляли, і з землі мене засипало, що я злякалася, схватилася.
Наша дзвонити, кажуть, дівчата, давайте в камеру, тому що тут нормальний дом.
Okay. Continuing on with our theme of monthly summaries, Governor Perkuden also released a video report on the 1st of December, giving updates on the evacuation of civilians and the recovery of bodies. According to the report, 159 bodies of deceased civilians were recovered throughout November. This number is quite disturbing and alarming given the report from September of 100 bodies recovered in the same manner. Furthermore, the number stands in stark contrast to the number of those officially reported as killed in the whole month of November across Kherson, 33. This indicates that civilians are dying from illness, thirst, starvation, isolation, old age, medical emergencies, accidents, and other natural causes at a higher rate than before. These causes of death are highly likely impacted due to the drone siege tactics of Russian forces, cutting off civilians from vital aid, basic resources, and evacuation routes. Additionally, it may indicate that many more civilians have been killed by Russian aggression than official sources indicate, or that many reported as killed in months prior have not been recovered until now. Let's talk about civilian casualties. Since January 2024, Russian military action in Kherson Oblast has caused at least 5,339 civilian casualties. Of the roughly 5,500 civilian casualties, Russian forces have killed 540 and wounded 4,799 in Kherson Oblast. Of those, 4,651 are from attacks in Kherson Rayon, while 688 are from attacks in Beryaslav Rayon. In Kherson Rayon, 429 civilians have been killed and 4,222 have been wounded. In Russian drone attacks have killed 169 and wounded 2,012 civilians. Russian shelling has killed 254 and wounded 2,146. Russian landmines in UXO have killed 6 and wounded 57 civilians. Russian Garan and Shahed-style drone attacks have wounded 7 civilians. In Beryaslav Rayon, 111 civilians have been killed and 577 have been wounded. Russian drone attacks have killed 72 and wounded 363. Russian shelling has killed 32 and wounded 144. Russian landmines in UXO have killed 6 and wounded 67. Russian Garan and Shahed-style drones have wounded 1, and other unspecific Russian military actions have resulted in 1 civilian death and 2 wounded civilians in Beryaslav Rayon. The scale. Right? I want to show you something real quick. Let's go to Tochny. Here we are. Let's go to Tochny. Let's go to posts. Let's go way back. Here we are. Hounds of Z. This is the first thing I wrote about this. Yeah. Here we are. We've got, yeah, 5 drone casualties per day in July. June 22nd to the 31st of July. You can see most 5 drone casualties a day. At most. In one day. Not even every day. And then July to August. Look how it explodes. Up to 11. Right? But in total. Right? In total. In Antonivka, number of drone casualty events during the first 23 days of August was double that of the entire month of July, and those strikes resulted in a staggering 66 casualties. 66 casualties. We're staring down the barrel of 3,000. The hell. $144 casualties. 144 total casualties in this study. This month, there were over 400 drone casualties. Or last month, I should say. God bless me, I just sneezed. But this is the thing. We were screaming about this when there were 144 casualties total in Antonivka. Across all of Ukraine now, human safari, 400 in a month. I think we're losing sight of what's important here. We're losing sight of the scale. It's growing so gradually right in front of our eyes that we're not able to really see it and process and understand the scale of what's happening here. Sucks. It's fucking horrible, man. Okay, so this video here, this is from our Tochny map. We have updated our Tochny map. Constanza and Chris put some freaking absolute elbow grease in and got our casualty map updated with most recent months, September and October. We'll be adding probably November and December, sometime around the new year or just after. And we have a statistics page that you can take a look at as well, which is also really awesome, I think. Oh wait, nope, I don't want to share this. But you can check out our human safari map at touchny.info and go to our statistics page to interact with the data which we've collected. Constanza just added all the data from September and October to the map, published it. The dip in September from the redeployment of units to Kherson is clearly visible as well. And then the spike in October from the new units rotated in to take up their positions. So you can see that. Look at that. It's really awesome when we get these really crisp graphics to show the story of what's going on. I mean, look at it, how it just skyrockets, and then there's the dips with the weather, and then it gets really bad and consistent throughout the first half of last year, and then really bad over the summer, and then dips, and now it's really bad again. That's how it is. So you can see here again all of the casualties which we've collected from the past 18 months. And these are just casualties within Kherson urban armada. That's not counting all the casualties that we see in Bilozerka, Chernobyevka, Beryaslav. None of those are included. And the previous number we were at was 2,877 total casualties on the map. But now we're at 3,128. So you can see all of the individual stat lines if you wish here. You can check the stats themselves with the clicking the link there for each of these. So what we saw was shelling killed 2, 1 municipal worker among them, Alexander. We saw 42 people wounded by shelling and bombing this week, a municipal worker and 4 civilians wounded earlier in November who sought attention earlier this week. Drones killed 7, including a medical worker who was Alina, the mother, and the police officer, Konstantin Zadari. The wounded, we saw 1 medical worker and 4 police officers wounded of the 22 total who were wounded. No Shahed Garan casualties this week. 1 person was wounded by UXO that week. For a total in Kherson Rayon alone, for a total of in Kherson Rayon alone of 74, 9 killed, 65 wounded. A really horrific week. One of the worst ones in a long time. Shelling and bombing wounded 1 in Beryaslav, but killed 2 with drones, wounded 4 with drones, one of them being a civilian wounded earlier in November. And then UXO wounded 2, 1 being a civilian wounded earlier in November. And then we saw 1 other this week, wounded civilian, didn't say exactly how they were wounded, but wounded earlier in November as well. So that's a total of 10 casualties, 2 killed and 8 wounded. Our weekly damage and infrastructure report, let's take a look. I think this is also from the 25th of November here, when there was that really, really awful day of shelling.
Где-то около часа примерно.
Скільки було прильотів?
1.
Постраждалих не було?
Не, я только 1 здесь был.
Yeah, so that was from the 25th. You could see some shelling on some garages, right? 5 garages right there. So apartment buildings, 24, private homes, 104, 1 bank, 1 volunteer headquarters, 2 educational institutions, 2 summer kitchens, 1 church, 2 kindergartens, 2 stores, 5 garages, 1 workshop, 1 barn, at least 5 critical infrastructure facilities, 3 cellular towers, 3 municipal utility companies, and 4 natural gas pipelines. Our weekly, sorry, very tired. Weekly damaged vehicle report We saw 21 civilian automobiles, 1 police car, 1 minibus, 1 bus, and 1 trolley bus. Remember, Kherson will never be a Russian city. Okay, and access to all the sources there. Let's move on to the most recent article for Kherson Weekly. Thank you for sticking with me through this so far. It's only been almost an hour, so we're doing okay. All right, so this week, much less than last. Right, so we saw 84 total casualties, now we're down to 50. Okay, so massive drop. Thank God. So 50 total casualties from Russian aggression, 5 killed, 5 wounded, drone attacks, killed 2, and wound 21. Here in Stanislav, again, Miruka supplying wonderful photos. And this is Stanislav on the riverbank looking back towards the fields that are burning because of Russian attacks. Human Safari, Stop Human Safari, sorry, Anti-Human Safari, Kherson Help Campaign just started a new fundraiser, so people are trying to raise funds for Kherson Help's new initiative to get drone detectors. Again, the drone detectors need to have their components switched out to account for new Russian drones. Okay, so today marks, or well, I guess technically, yeah, it might be actually today, technically. 1 year of Kherson Weekly. 1 whole year I've been writing this. I've been writing about Kherson longer since, I've been tracking it since June, writing since August of 2024. But this is 1 year. 1 year. Unfortunately, more than 18 months after I began tracking what would become known as the Human Safari, these vicious attacks still persist. Russia still seeks to ethnically cleanse Kherson of Ukrainians via its systematic drone attack campaign on civilians. I've been chronicling these horrors for a whole year now. I knew a year ago, as I was watching the number of victims grow throughout autumn of 2024, that this would need to be aggregated, investigated, and chronicled. Kherson lies at the nexus of the worst of Russian terror at the best of Ukrainian resistance. Some of Russia's worst human rights violations have occurred in Kherson City, formerly occupied territory, or the temporarily occupied left bank. Yet, the people of Kherson fight on and continue to live in spite of the specter of death hanging over each person living in the city and the surrounding liberated settlements. Thank you to those who have been reading since the beginning. And those who have joined along the way, I promise to you that I will not stop until these horrors end. And I promise that I'm not going to stop. I want to be in Kherson. I don't know how that's possible, but we might get there. We will try. I will try. When I say we, I mean I'm gonna go there and try and show you. Hopefully. But you guys can go and check out 7th to 13th December 2024 if you want. This is my very first edition. I did a video of the week, photo of the week at that time, although I've changed, and then Terror from the Left Bank, so you can see a lot of Russian footage. And then I did some drama in the 70th Motor Rifle Division. I had this intrigue idea. I was going to do like an intrigue section. I don't know. Because there was a lot back then. And to be fair, I use it here and there now. Although I saved up all my intrigue for Suyeta. So, this is my little investigation. And this is my first iteration of the data. You can see things have come a long way. Things have come a long way. But shelling, 0 killed, 8 wounded. But then drones, 4 killed, 33 wounded. Like, insane. And then I was just doing small aggregation. 0 public transport, 23 civilian auto, 5 police and EMS and 1 agricultural machinery. Yeah. Back when it was the Bober's Lodge. Yeah. Wow. But yeah, so that's Kherson Weekly, the first edition. So I highly recommend you go back and check it out. There's a lot of valuable information, and a lot of my subscribers were not subscribed to me back when I started Kherson Weekly. A lot of my subscribers have actually come in the last 6 months. So a lot of my earlier investigative work they haven't read yet. So I really recommend people go back and read Kherson Weekly 7th to 13th December to see how things were a year ago. So also join rallies next week on 13th and 14th of December later this week in more than 30 cities in almost 20 countries across the globe to help save Kherson and stop human safari. Visit humansafari.org. All right, so you guys can visit humansafari.org, save Kherson. They're doing a worldwide rally. Unfortunately, I don't have means of transportation or money, so I cannot go anywhere. I'm stuck at my house. I'm stuck. But yeah, you can see all the different cities. Looks like in the US, we've got Chicago, Denver, Fort Worth, Los Angeles, New York, San Diego, Washington, D.C., Seattle, and Dallas. Yeah. And there's some film screenings too of Zarina's. This is organized by Zarina Zabriskie, of course. She asked me to make sure that we try and get this out as a Kherson focused community. Okay, drone data. So back to some drone interception data. We saw I took 3 weeks off of doing drone data to let it accumulate. We had a little bit of a dip and then an improvement, and we'll talk about that. So weekly drone attacks this week reached their 4th highest peak all year, with Russian forces launching 2,637 drone attacks across the entire oblast, with 3 consecutive weeks over 2,500. The weekly average for drone attacks launched by Russian forces has now surpassed 2,100. Russian forces also surpassed 90,000 total drone attacks for the year. However, 75,000 of those attacks have failed due to interdiction by Ukrainian CUAS operations. Inside Kherson City and the Khersonska urban Hromada, the interception rate has remained just below at or above 95% since about the second week of October 2025. Outside the city, however, the interception rate dipped below 80% 3 weeks ago, while recovering to 93 to 94% in the last 2 weeks. The last 2 weeks also featured the highest and the 3rd highest number of drone interceptions outside of Kherson City, on a weekly basis, that is, while interception rates rebounded. This shows that while effectiveness briefly dropped in the week before, Ukrainian CUAS forces outside Kherson City have the capacity to intercept at almost the same level of effectiveness as those inside the city, despite, I should have written this here, despite variation in volume, despite the variable of volume of attacks, right? So, I had this hypothesis that, maybe there was a threshold, right, over which a certain number of drones is just too much for the forces outside of Kherson City itself to withstand. Kherson City, right? Let me break this down just a little bit more. Being inside the city is actually a benefit. It makes you a smaller target and easier to hit in some ways, but it also makes it easier for you to concentrate your air defense and your electronic warfare assets and create a thicker blanket of anti-air assets or electronic warfare assets. which is why you get those consistent 95% interception rates week after week after week after week inside the city. But outside the city, that's different. That's going to depend on where your enemy wants to hit you and where you have your assets stationed, right? And that can be a bit of a cat and a mouse game, right? So like you don't want to have your air defense assets stationary, because then they will get hit by something bigger that they can't intercept, a la Iskander, or they might get hit by MRL fire or something like that, or artillery, right? But being mobile opens up vulnerabilities in your coverage, right? You can't be everywhere all at once. That's the problem. So there's going to be situations where there's some weeks where, or it could also be up to the failure of electronic warfare if the Russians update software or start using a different frequency. So you can see these fluctuations happen in the interception rate, and it could be to either of those factors. It could be air defense assets aren't in place where the Russians were trying to attack mostly, or it could be that the Russians actually adapted, right? And then the Ukrainians adapt, because we see they rebound to 95% outside, intercepted outside of Kherson city. So we see like dip below to like 78%, dip back or jump back up to 95%. So we actually can see the cat and mouse game in the data, right? That's an interesting thing, I think, personally. Again, we're on the way to 100,000 total drone attacks. We're missing 3 weeks of data. If those were each 2,000, we'd be well on our way to having over 100,000 drone attacks by the end of the year in Kherson. So it definitely could be plausible that by the end of the year there will have been 100,000, even if we don't have the official data, because we're missing those 3 weeks. So it could still be within the margin, like I said in the last video. So we have a daily average of 300 drone attacks. 130 of those are targeting Kherson city itself, about 170 outside the city. We're destroying about 250 of those every day. About 112 of those are being destroyed inside the city, and 138 outside the city. So on a weekly basis, we're getting about like 50 successful drone attacks inside the city, or 50 drone attacks total, successful drone attacks total, probably around like 20-ish, just below 20 inside the city, and then outside the city somewhere around like 33 for successful drone attacks, according to the data that we have from Governor Prokudin. Let me blow this image up here so that we can all see this. Again, I said in the last time, like when the numbers, when like our destroyed drones and our total attacks are close together, right? When the yellow and the baby blue and when the yellow and the baby blue are close together, that's good. When the blue and the green are close together, that's good. When the red and the orange lines are close together, that's good. That means interceptions are happening at an exceptional rate. But, for example, when we see the yellow arc up 3 weeks ago and the blue stays consistent, that's a problem, right? When we see that deviation, that's how we know, okay, total attacks have surpassed our destroyed drones, and we're not kind of keeping neck and neck anymore, so it's a problem. So that's one of the things that we know is an indicator of success in this graphic. What's an indicator of successful CUAS operations? So taking a look at the drone interception rate over time, we can see our aggregate average over here, right outside Kherson Oblast, is still just below 80%. It's yeah, probably somewhere around 79% average right now, and we're seeing just over 85% for effectiveness inside Khersonska Hromada, and this is for the whole year, right? So there's like a 5, 6, 7 point difference in the averages of interceptions between, right? But our claimed effectiveness and our actual effectiveness, the blue and the red lines, those being close together is really good because this helps us know that we're not being manipulated by the statistics, right? The claimed effectiveness number is the one that's presented on those green infographics, and then I do the math to actually figure out what the true interception rate is, and it's just as a way to show people like these numbers are valid, right? We can trust these numbers to make some statistical sense. Okay, situation report. So 2 civilians wounded last week sought medical attention this week. A 64-year-old woman wounded by shelling in Kherson on 28th November, and a 33-year-old man wounded by a drone attack in Pridniprovska on 30th November. A 62-year-old man wounded last week in a drone strike in Pivnichny Rayon died in hospital this week on the 3rd of December. On the 1st of December, Russian forces unleashed multiple rocket launcher barrages on Chornobayivka, wounding 3 men, 32, 63, and 77, and 4 women, 30, 49, 62, and 62. A series of separate Russian drone attacks in Dniprovsky Rayon wounded a 52-year-old man and a 36-year-old woman, while another drone attack on a police car wounded a 41-year-old policeman, a 72-year-old man, a 59-year-old woman, and a 70-year-old woman. 2 women, 37 and 76, were killed, and a 42-year-old man was injured by Russian shelling in Dniprovsky Rayon on December 2nd. A 51-year-old man was injured by a Russian drone strike in Dniprovsky Rayon. West of Kherson, a 35-year-old woman and a 49-year-old man were wounded by Russian shelling in Belozerka, and a 43-year-old woman was wounded by Russian shelling in Komishani. Okay, let's take a look at this video of the shelling in Chornobayivka on the 1st of December.
У мене тут Мерседес Спринтер робочий стояв. Я тільки уїхав на роботу грузити. Жінка дзвонить, я приїхав, я їх глянув, ворота вивернула.
У мене, якщо що, я ось сюди в пройом ховаюся. Оце тут присіла, воно оттуда посипалося все, а отсюди двері полетіли всі. Я тут на диванчику ось сиділа, на роботу собиралася. Тут воно потолки посипалися і все. І в ванной потолок обсипався. Ой, Господи. Оце сюди в угол будинку прильот був. Ну так, да, я вийшла, дивлюся, воно почало загоратися. Я бігом пожарник визвала, вони приїхали все тушити.
Ну, зятю зробили операцію на ногі, а жінки на голові.
Ще дороблять?
Так, да, дороблять. Жінки ще не зробили, а зятю вже зробили. Це все перебито. Отут дитину накрив. Отут поранився він. Жінка була в цій кімнаті, ось тут лежала.
Я зайшов тільки за телефоном у спальню до себе і почалися вибухи. Не встигли в підвал, навіть в коридорі швидко полягали. 4 це точно, що сильні такі тут сипалися, все, не пам'ятаю скільки точно, але 4, мабуть, це точно було, не менше. Сусіди, 2 поранених. Один молодий хлопець, почти 30, і жінка, легке ранення, але все одно скоро забрала.
We also saw on the night between 2nd and 3rd of December, Russian shelling targeted Kherson's bus depot, damaging 19 different trolley buses. And then on the night of December 3rd, a 6-year-old girl was killed and her 44-year-old father was severely injured by Russian shelling in the Prosky Rayon. More children this week as well. So let's... Whoops. I wasn't talking with my microphone on. So, we've seen Chernobyevka hit by MRL shelling time and time again for months now. And every time it's a mass casualty event because it's an aerial denial or an aerial effects weapon that's not designed to be precise. It's designed to suppress an enemy over an area, throughout an area. And the use of this weapon in a civilian village like this is purely criminal. And then, we also saw on the night between the 2nd and 3rd of December, Russian shelling targeted Kherson's bus depot, damaging 19 trolley buses. A 6-year-old girl was killed, and her 49-year-old father was severely injured by Russian shelling in Nov-07 Rayon on 3rd December. Russian forces fired a barrage of artillery on a prenatal care center in Kherson during the day on 4th December. A baby was being delivered during the shelling, but fortunately no one was injured in this instance. Let's take a look here.
Це операція йшла якраз?
Встигли, тільки йшли розвертатися. Ой-ой-ой.
ординаторська. А прийомники там що? Отуда відкрийте двері.
Okay. Russian forces also severely damaged Kherson's thermal power plant, cutting almost 500 buildings off from the power grid and plunging more than 40,000 customers into frigid cold darkness. Kherson's administration is taking emergency measures to reconnect those 40,000 to alternative decentralized methods of heating and power. Suspension in operation seems to be permanent due to the extent of damage and the threat to utility workers. However, on 4th December, Russian forces also shelled Kherson's Dniprovsky Rayon, wounding 2 women, 60 and 68, 3 men, 43, 49, and 67, and a drone strike in Dniprovsky Rayon wounded 2 women, 53 and 60. Russian shelling in Tekstilne wounded a 66-year-old woman. In Antonivka, a 73-year-old woman was wounded by a Russian landmine. West of Kherson, a 36-year-old motorcyclist was wounded by Russian drone strike in Bilozerka. In Kizomys, a 57-year-old man was killed by a Russian drone strike. In Komishany, Russian shelling wounded a 77-year-old woman. Russian shelling on the 5th of December wounded a 77-year-old man in Tevrivsky Rayon, while a 57-year-old woman was wounded by a drone strike in Bilozerka. A 62-year-old man was wounded in Dniprovsky Rayon by Russian shelling on 6th of December. On the 7th of December, 2 gas station employees, a 25-year-old woman and a 43-year-old man, were attacked by and wounded by a Russian drone. In Pereyaslav Rayon, 1 man was killed, 6 more civilians were wounded by Russian drone attacks. 1 man was wounded by the detonation of UXO. On the 1st of December, a 61-year-old man driving a car was hit by a Russian FPV strike on the road between Rakivka and Urozhaina. Kherson police released video of the rescue, bringing the man to the hospital for treatment of a severe leg injury. Another 61-year-old man in Beryaslav City was wounded by unexploded ordnance. A 44-year-old man was struck by an FPV in Beryaslav City as well. To the north of Beryaslav, Russian forces killed a 77-year-old man in Dochane via an FPV drone strike. East of Beryaslav, in Nov-07, 3 elderly women, 69, 70, and 71, were wounded by a Russian FPV strike on the 2nd of December. And to end this week, a Russian drone strike in Novovorontsovka on the 7th of December wounded a 50-year-old woman. Let's take a look at the video. This is the rescue of the 61-year-old man in Urozhaina. So loud.
Давай. На мешок, на мешок. Бать, живый? Да живый. Давай. Открывай. Давай. Есть. Грузи, ноги бери. Стой. Давай. Быстрее. Закрывай. Пошел. Поехали. Терпи, Вать, терпи. Возле поста. Оно скоро, наверное, едет. Да. Чи что там? Ну скоро должно было ехать. Тихо, Бать, живи. Нас высадить, пацаны. Да, сразу на больничку.
The police are so loud. The police intro is so loud. All right, but you can see how severe that leg injury was, right? Like most of his hip was blown away there. Like part of his hip and his gluteus was severely mangled. from the drone strike on his car. Okay, updates on the numbers. Since January 2024, Russian military action in Kherson Oblast has caused at least 5,389 civilian casualties. Of the roughly 5,500 civilian casualties, Russian forces have killed 545 and wounded 4,844 in Kherson Oblast. Of those, 4,693 are from attacks in Kherson Rayon, while 696 are from attacks in Beryaslav Rayon. In Kherson Rayon, 433 civilians have been killed and 4,260 have been wounded. Russian drone attacks have killed 170 and wounded 2,027 civilians. Russian shelling has killed 257 and wounded 2,168 civilians. Russian landmines and UXO have killed 6 and wounded 58 civilians. Russian Garan and Shahed-style drone attacks have wounded 7 civilians. In Beryaslav Rayon, 112 civilians have been killed and 584 have been wounded. Russian drone attacks have killed 73 and wounded 369 civilians. Russian shelling has killed 32 and wounded 144. Russian landmines and UXO have killed 6 and wounded 68. Russian Garan and Shahed-style drones have wounded 1 civilian. Other unspecified military actions have resulted in 1 civilian death and 2 wounded civilians in Beryaslav Rayon. So, this week, 3 killed from shelling and bombing in Kherson Rayon, 22 wounded, one of them being from last week. Drone attacks this week killed 1, not including the 62-year-old man from Pivnichny Rayon who died on the 3rd of December in hospital from when he was wounded in either the 29th or the 30th of November. I can't remember off the top of my head. Actually, it says. Yeah, 30th. Okay. 30th of November. And, okay, 15 people were wounded, one of them being a police officer and 1 civilian who was wounded last week. Garans and Shaheds, no casualties. Landmines and UXO, 1 person was wounded for a total of 42, 4 killed, 38 wounded. That's a much, much lower total than we saw the week prior, right? We were looking at 74 casualties in Kherson Rayon. Now we're down to 42, right? This can be due to weather, or it could also be due to problems with drones. Seems like the drones specifically went down. Not sure why. Could be just weather. But on the other hand, drones reigned supreme in Beryaslav Rayon. We saw 1 person killed and 6 people wounded, with 1 person wounded from a UXO and nobody wounded from shelling or Garans. So, in total, Kherson Oblast saw 50 civilian casualties, 5 killed, 45 wounded. Our daily damaged buildings and infrastructure report, we had 18 apartment buildings, 168 private homes, 1 administrative building, 3 medical facilities, or medical institutions of various kinds, 1 educational, or 4 educational institutions, the maternity hospital, a shop, a private business, an office building, a bakery, 2 post offices, a fire station, a church, a farm, probably in Beryaslav Rayon, a building of a utility company, at least 5 critical infrastructure facilities, 3 natural gas pipelines, a pair of garages, 2 more cellular towers, 2 outbuildings or outhouses, and a petrol station where we saw that 25-year-old girl and that 43-year-old man wounded. And here are some vehicles that were destroyed this week in various attacks. We saw 3 police cars targeted, 17 civilian cars targeted, 1 minibus, 26 trolley buses, most of them from the 19 that were destroyed or damaged between the 2nd and 3rd of December, and then I think another group of 7 or so were destroyed later in the week in another round of shelling. I think maybe between the 4th and the 5th of December. Could have been later in the week. I might have misremembered that. And then we saw a motorcyclist attacked by a drone in Bilizerka, and so a motorcycle as well. Remember, Kherson will never be a Russian city, even though we did actually see, I do want to bring this up just a little bit. We did see Putin say in his in an interview, a press conference recently, that he would not be doing the like, I get Donetsk, but you guys get to freeze the front line in Zaporizhia and Kherson. He said, no, absolutely not. That's not going to happen. We're not going to freeze the front line and I get to keep Donetsk. I'm going to take Donetsk, and I'm going to take all of Zaporizhia, and I'm going to take all of Kherson. Those are the demands. So the Russians are still demanding a crossing over the Dnieper. Dnieper, whatever you want to call it. But that can't be allowed, right? The Russians, as it is, don't currently have the ability to do a riverine crossing in force in Kherson, but they could have it. It's possible. But I think in order to do a true crossing to take Kherson, or actually really, really try and take Kherson, I think they have to take Zaporizhia City first. And I think that's maybe reliant too much on history on my part. But looking back at what I've read through the Soviet General Staff notes and some historians' notes on the Red Army's operation to retake Kherson from the Nazis in 43-44. I think they need to get onto the other side of the river further upstream first. And the reason why they need to do that is because the difference in elevation height is just too much. You need to be able to attack from the north down the river bank. Attacking straight across the riverbank is like suicidal. The Red Army did it, but it's the Red Army. So and the Russians, yeah, they could do that as well and maybe secure some territory. But I think the more successful approach would be to take lose however, 50,000 men taking Zaporizhia City or whatever you're going to do. But then you need to cross the river there and use that as your way over and make and obviously you're going to have to take like Nikopol and stuff like that first. So there's a lot of dominoes that need to fall first before Kherson can fall that way. And this makes me skeptical of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast being safe, because of the way it's shaped geographically and what I think the Russians' intentions are. And we're seeing the Russians fighting in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast right now. So I think we might see demands expand in the future, over the course of the next year, as the Russians work their way closer towards Zaporizhia City, and as the Russians work their way little bit by bit into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. I don't think they will take Zaporizhia City anytime soon. I don't think that's really realistic, currently speaking. Possible in the future, maybe. I mean, I don't really know about that. The Russian army, even in its pinnacle in 2022, struggled at taking cities, so I don't know about that. Cities of that size, I should say, like super cities, mega cities. They're not mega cities, but as far as Ukraine goes, they are. I don't think they'll have that kind of success. So I still think Kherson is safe from occupation, but safe from ethnic cleansing? Absolutely not. So make sure 13th to 14th you go out to your local rally, and let's make sure that we show out for Kherson. Please. Let's save Kherson, stop human safari, and please go to Kherson Help Anti-Human Safari Initiative and donate here. We need the help. This helps people on the ground. Spravjny, Strong Because Free, and Union of Help, right? All these other NGOs, right? We can help them help the people down there. So this is one of the best ways to do it. This is the best way to do it. Elizaveta has done a great job. So we need to do a great job. It's on the rest of us. Okay, that's all I got for you. Yeah. Okay. And let's see if I can close this. Does he know how to do it? Okay. До побачення.